So first of all, I wanted to thank everyone for attending today's inaugural DSpaceDirect training session. My name is Carissa Smith, and I am the product manager at DSpace, and I work both on the DSpaceDirect project as well as the DuraCloud project. Before we get started, I wanted to note that today's training session not only is the first DSpaceDirect training session that our group has conducted, but it is really meant to be for you folks. So feel free to jump in with questions or comments or feedback as the presenters are talking today. Again, it's really meant to be informal and a conversation to get you guys up and going and loading content into your DSpaceDirect accounts. So we're here to answer any questions you may have and also to provide you with this introductory information to get you started as well. I'd like to introduce two of my colleagues that are the presenters of today's session. Timothy Donahue, who is the technical lead and developer for the DSpace open source project and is the main tech lead on DSpaceDirect as well. And Valerie Hollister, who is the Director of Community Programs at DuraSpace and does a lot of work with the DSpace open source community and is a really great reference for pretty much anything and everything DSpace. But I'll let them chime in and say hello, and then we can get started with the training session. One last thing I'll note from an administrative perspective as we go through. As I mentioned, please jump in with questions. But when you're not speaking, if you could, everybody could go on mute, just so we don't have too much interference as Tim presents today. That would be helpful. But again, please feel free to come off of mute and ask questions or speak at any point in time. So with that, I'll let Tim and Val say hi, and I will go on mute myself, and we can get started.
I will start first. This is Valerie Hollister, and Tim's going to be doing the presentation today, but I did want a chance just to say hello and introduce myself. As Chris has said, I work with the DSpace community. I've been working with the DSpace community for about 6 years, and I am your link to the open source community. So if you have questions about different use cases, different types of content that you're curious about, how other people are storing, that's something that I can try to help find someone who's doing something similar within the community, or anything else that you may be curious about, any other happenings that you may be curious about with the DSpace community. I'm happy to help with that link. But just welcome, and welcome to DSpaceDirect, and I'll let Tim take the lead.
Okay, this is Tim Donahue, and I'll be doing this presentation, as both Val and Chris had mentioned. We figured what the best way to start everyone out, most of the presentation here, the hour and a half, is actually going to be kind of a live demo, sort of getting you familiar with some of what DSpace has to offer, how you could potentially use it for your institution, and kind of basically how to get started and different resources that can help you get started. But before we get into that live demo, we all thought it would be a good opportunity here to just give you a high-level introduction to some of the concepts that are within DSpace, as well as in DSpaceDirect, as well as just some of the concepts of how to start to think about a repository, what DSpace is, and how you could potentially use it and what sorts of content you can put into it, and how other people potentially use it. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started here. I've asked both Carissa and Val to kind of keep track of any sort of questions that could come across the chat. There's a little chat window as well. You're welcome to type questions into there. If I miss them, they'll stop me during this presentation, but you're also welcome to chime in just over the audio here and ask questions as we go through. I'm more than willing to be interrupted because this works a lot better if you guys are willing to ask questions when they come up, and it also helps us to improve this throughout the entire process of improving the training and making the materials, both that will be presented here during this training session and also the materials you'll have available afterwards as resources. It helps us improve those as we hear more of your feedback. So we'll go ahead and get started here. Let me get over to the right window. Okay, so here's our general agenda for what we'll be going through here for the next hour and a half. Admittedly, since this is our first time through all of this, I'm not really sure whether this is going to take an hour or an hour and a half, or if we'll be cut short on time at the end, but we'll see how things go, and we'll make the most of our time here and figure out how best to move on from there. But I did want to start with some introductory material, like I had mentioned, about what is a repository, how you could potentially use it, and then some of the high-level overview of the conceptual ideas that DSpace has within it, so you can understand how to start to set up your DSpace, as well as that live demo, which makes up the majority of what we'll be doing today. So this is sort of the quote. I'm not going to go read through this big quote from Clifford Lynch here, but it's basically sort of the definitive quote for what people say a repository is. And DSpace is basically one of the most widely used repository software out there in the world. But there's two main points here, and you'll see I kind of colored two sections of this quote. The main points are that, one, it's sort of a system or a set of services to allow you to manage digital materials created by an institution or a community. But at the same point in time, it's also a commitment to the stewardship of those materials. So it's kind of both the system itself as well as a willingness to set some policies at your local level around how you want to use the system, how you want to allow people access to it, what sort of material you want to put into it. There's a lot of local policies that come in play here that I'll keep kind of coming back to this idea of DSpace provides you a lot of options, but one of the first steps you may want to take locally is starting to figure out and play around with how you may want to use DSpace and what sort of local policies and decisions you want to make about the types of content you want to be storing in there, who's going to be putting materials in, things like that. So it's sort of a twofold aspect here, the system itself and the policies around it. But more at a more human or low-level aspect of things, like not necessarily a human aspect of things, but bringing down that quote to a lower level here. What a repository really does is sort of these 7 things. It's going to capture content, often research, but it can be any sort of content that you want to put in it. DSpace can capture any file you put into it whatsoever. It stores that content within the system, obviously. It provides you utilities to manage that content and manage information about that content. So the metadata, the information about who authored it, the title, all that sort of stuff. It provides online access to that content in a persistent manner. So DSpace has this idea of providing sort of persistent URLs to that content, so that even if your main website address changes, you can point that persistent URL at your new website address, and that content can still be found through that persistent URL. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. Repositories also tend to provide preservation utilities. They allow you to better manage that content over time and find ways to keep it accessible in the longer term. And DSpace has some utilities for that purpose, and it also helps to support increased visibility to that content. So it's not just a matter of putting a PDF up on a website and hoping that Google finds it, but DSpace and other repository systems actually try and enhance the web-based presence of your content to the point that it's increased visibility within things like Google and Google Scholar and other search engines. And it does all of that stuff, like I mentioned, with flexibility around it to allow you to meet your local policies, your local decisions. So there is flexibility in the framework that is DSpace, that you can make some decisions at your local level to decide how you want to support all your goals. So some of the types of content that people tend to put into DSpace, this is just a small level listing to give you an idea of what things you could put in. There's plenty of other stuff you could put in that is outside of this particular content type. Like I'd mentioned, DSpace will accept any digital file you give it. But some digital files it can do more things with. And I'll talk about that a little bit more as we go through the demo. If it doesn't understand the certain digital files, all it can really do is give it back to you in the same format that you gave it initially. But these are some of the types of content that you can stick into DSpace. You got the scholarly articles, digital reports or unpublished works, conference materials, dissertations, learning materials, research data, various collections like library collections or special collections, and then of course audio, video, images, most any sort of file type you want to give it. The one thing I did want to note here that, that not everybody necessarily may be familiar with, you may be familiar with, you may not be, is that obviously when it comes to scholarly articles or things that have been published before or copyrighted before, it is worth taking care to make sure you understand some of the copyright around those materials as best you can. It's not to say that it's an easy task to do in all cases, but it is definitely something to be wary of, just because of the fact that when people get things published in journals, of course, sometimes they are signing off their copyright to the publisher so that they no longer own copyright over particular formats of that document. It really depends on the publisher, and it's hard to really nail down to the nth degree, but we do like to warn people just to be kind of aware that that is an aspect of dealing with published works. Oftentimes there is some format of that work you still can make available through your repository. You just may not necessarily be able to put in the publisher version unless that publisher allows you to. And that's something that I should mention as well. Oftentimes repositories do have some basic local policies around things having to do with published works, wherein they don't necessarily review every single published work that it gets put into the system, but if there is a complaint to the repository, maybe their local policy may be to just take that material down immediately or withdraw it from the repository. And I can talk to you about how you can do that within DSpace as well through this demo here. So it's just something to be aware of as far as a local policy decision. And at the same point in time, I do want to mention a couple things that a repository is not, things that DSpace really is not built for and doesn't really do. But it can complement many of these various systems if you have them running locally at your institution. So DSpace is not a digital library cataloging system, of course. It doesn't. Those sort of systems are more geared towards actually allowing people to borrow books or things like that at a library. DSpace can't handle that aspect of borrowing materials. It's more about getting those materials up on the web. At the same point in time, it's not a web publishing platform. You can't create a website out of it. You can't really publish online journals through DSpace. You can make an online journal available for download through DSpace, but a lot of the publishing decisions there are not necessarily an aspect of DSpace. It's not a content management system, and it's not a learning management system. So content management systems, for instance, those can also be used to create websites like WordPress or blogs. DSpace doesn't have that ability to actually create a website within it. It also does not have many of the materials within a learning management system where you're basically creating a course in itself. It doesn't allow people to sign up for a course or anything like that, but it could allow you to store course materials that have been generated by a learning management system and make them more broadly available. It's also not a system for storing source code for programmers or anything like that. But again, it can complement many of these various systems so that you could actually store content that was generated through one of these other systems within DSpace to make it more widely available. It just doesn't have all of the utilities of some of these systems. So it's worth understanding that from the get-go. So at this point in time, that's kind of the very high-level picture of sort of what a repository is and giving you a picture of what DSpace kind of does at a very, very high level. But at this point in time, I do want to get a little bit more specific with what DSpace provides and what DSpaceDirect also provides before we jump into the demo and you get to see this in a more live fashion. So it's worth understanding here what sort of content DSpace has within it and the aspect of DSpace's hierarchical structure. There's a hierarchy that you can create within how you store things within DSpace. And it's worth understanding that hierarchy and how people have used it at other institutions before we go through an example of starting to actually create a sample hierarchy within DSpaceDirect. So at a very basic level, DSpace has 3 different types of objects you can store within it. Those three objects are a community, or a subcommunity, which is just sort of an embedded community, one that's underneath a community, a collection, and then individual items. So this sort of diagram here is meant to represent how this hierarchical structure is laid out within DSpace. Communities essentially tend to map to sort of organizational units that may be within your institution. They can map to other things as well. You can make decisions on how you want to set these up. But essentially at a very basic level, a community is sort of a group of collections. And so how you want to group your collections within DSpace is totally up to you. And you can create as many subgroups underneath that as you want. So you can have a top-level sort of community and as many sub-communities underneath that in a hierarchical fashion that you want to create. But the idea there is that the communities are really sort of meant to be sort of organizational groups around collections of items. And so stepping down then to the collection level, a collection is really about grouping items. It's about grouping together individual documents or individual works within the system and defining some sort of collection around those works, putting them together in a sort of organizational fashion. This is often the DSpace came out of the world of sort of like libraries and archives, so the idea of a collection is very much similar to how a library creates different collections within itself, or an archives creates different collections within itself. And then at that lowest level then, the items, which are the things people really want to go and download within your DSpace, that's basically made up of metadata about that item, author, title, subjects, things like that, as well as the files that people can actually go and download or view, the PDFs or the Word documents or video or audio files. It is worth noting that DSpace, rather than calling those files, it actually calls them bitstreams. So if you're looking within DSpace, even in the administrative interface, the word bitstream essentially is a file. It's just the special terminology that DSpace uses to represent an actual file. So this gives you an idea of basically that overall hierarchy. And I'm going to pause here just for a moment to make sure that this makes some general sense. And if anybody has any questions popping out right away, you can pop in right now. I'm going to talk at the very next slide on how you could potentially organize this hierarchy and how people use it within DSpace at institutions. Okay, so not hearing any pressing questions at this point in time. I'm going to move along here to how you could potentially organize your communities and collections into a hierarchy at your own institution. So that, as I had mentioned, they can sort of mirror organizational units within your institution. So at the example of sort of a university, which is where DSpace is most often used, but it's used in many other types of places as well. Communities often get mapped to like a college within that university or a department within that university. And there may be sub-departments within those departments or subgroups within there. Collections then within those communities can often get mapped to maybe a particular collection for a research project or a research group, the materials that have been generated from that particular research project, from that particular research group, and then under there the actual items generated by that group or project. They could also be you could also see collections relating to types of items, a grouping, whether that's a subject grouping, so like all of the works that have to do with mathematics or physics or whatever, or it could be a grouping around sort of dissertations or a thesis or student works, where you're kind of like grouping together those works into a collection of dissertations within a particular department or similar. And also, again, those structures can be very much hierarchical, so you can put as many levels of sub-communities underneath a community. You could do many different levels of sub-departments or research groups and then have a collection of works underneath that. Or if you're actually wanting to store journal content, like you have an electronic journal at your institution or some sort of electronic material that you're wanting to store in a hierarchical fashion. Some groups actually use this hierarchy to represent that. So at the very last level there, you can see a department may have an electronic journal that they publish somewhere. And then a collection could actually be one issue of that journal. And within that issue are many different articles. And so there might be many different PDFs that represent the articles within that particular issue of the journal. So that's another way you can use that hierarchy as well. It doesn't necessarily have to always mirror organizational units or even subject groups, but it often is used in that fashion.
We have a question, Tim, from one of
Sure.
our audience members. Can an item or collection point to more than one community?
Items always exist within a collection. That's the one thing to understand. An item can exist in multiple collections, though. So it's basically one single item that is linked within multiple collections. So you could have an item that belongs to a particular research project, but also happens to be a student's dissertation as part of that project. And so you could link it into the collection for that research project, as well as a collection of dissertations. So items can exist in multiple places. However, with the hierarchy, the community, subcommunity collection hierarchy, it's currently difficult in DSpace to actually make collections appear under multiple communities. That's been a often requested feature that is not yet implemented within DSpace, but I do hope that at some point in time in the future it will be available. So it's not really an easy thing to do in that aspect. It's more that items can be put in multiple places or linked to multiple places. So does that make sense? Hopefully.
Indeed
okay.
It does.
Yep. Yeah, I'm noticing I got a little pop-up here. I can't always catch it, but I've got a little pop-up going on my screen here.
Yep. For folks in the audience, I'll verbalize questions. If you don't want to chime in, I'll verbalize them to Tim. So feel free to use the chat facility. And Tim, if you can ignore that pop-up, and I will make sure to monitor that.
Sounds good. Okay, so that's the very basics of the hierarchy within DSpace and those three types of objects: the community, the collection, and the items. And just before we get into the live demo here, where I'll show you how you can create those communities, those collections, and those items, and make decisions around them, I do want to take a brief moment just to let you kind of make you aware of some of the sorts of questions you may want to start to ask yourself at your local institution around planning for how you want to use DSpace. And these are things you can think about while I'm doing the demo here a little bit, or things you can do, afterwards, of course, to start to plan out how you want to set policies around these things. And you're welcome to ask us questions even after the demo, or go back and review this demo later on, because we are recording it and we'll make it available to you later on. So these are some of the sorts of questions you may want to start to think about at your local institution around using DSpace. One thing to note here is I do have a link here at the bottom of the page, which we'll also be sending you after this demo, that brings you off to the DSpaceDirect knowledge base, which is an area that we've just created that starts to give you some information about how you can start to utilize DSpace and some of the getting started things. So not only just getting started with planning, so asking a lot of these various questions that you may want to start to think about, but also it has an overview of how to actually perform many of these tasks within DSpace. So what I'm going to actually be demoing right now is actually based entirely off of a page within this DSpaceDirect knowledge base. So you could go back to that particular knowledge base and review many of the how-tos of how to actually generate content within DSpace and set things up and all that sort of stuff. So this link will be sent to you afterwards, and you'll also be able to grab it real quick in this very next step as well, so you don't need to frantically write it down if you haven't been able to capture it already. So next, we're actually going to go into the demo. And so what I'm going to be demoing you here is our demo site for DSpaceDirect.org. It's basically just a very basic DSpaceDirect installation that just looks like basic DSpace. So it may look slightly different than your own institutional version, but it's going to be extremely similar. The only differences are in terms of the look and feel, the theme. There might be slight color differences and stuff like that, but the content will be the same. So you're welcome to actually visit this and kind of follow along a little bit as I go. I do want to mention that I'm going to be logging into this site as an administrative user, so you won't be able to see all of those aspects during the actual live walkthrough here. You'll have to actually look at the screen that I'll be showing you here. But I do plan on immediately after this demo, when we send you all a follow-up email with the links of everything you might want to be aware of, we are going to set up a demo user account for you on this demo site so that each of your institutions can actually go in and use this demo instance sort of as like a sandbox. You can play around there a little bit and create a couple dummy communities or collections or submit a couple items. So you can get a little bit familiar with DSpace and DSpaceDirect without necessarily having to jump right into your institutional version in case you're just a little bit wary of creating some dummy content to begin with. It gives you a place to play around, essentially. So you will have that opportunity after this demo to play around on your own. Okay, so now I'm going to exit out of the PowerPoint here, and I'm going to jump over to the actual DSpaceDirect demo site. One thing to ask real quick for Carissa or Val, is that the font here big enough, or do I need to bump this up?
It's readable, a little blurry. If you could.
Let me bump it up here.
That looks much better, thank you.
I'll just bump it up to something big.
Yep, nope, that looks actually perfect. Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Looks good for me too.
Okay, excellent. Okay, so this demo site, you could actually go and visit it like I'd mentioned on your own screen. If you actually have another window open or a way to grab that, it's just demo.dspacedirect.org. As I had mentioned, the knowledge base you could actually jump to from this demo site. There's a link here at the little heading information where you could actually start to go look at that knowledge base. And what I'm following here in terms of this actual demo is actually available on that knowledge base page. I'm going to open it up here real quick. We've got a getting started how-to page here, which is essentially walking you step by step through the demo. Right now it's just a textual walking you through step by step this demo, but we're going to be enhancing that as we go with more materials. But without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and start getting into the demo here. I highly encourage you to ask questions as we go through this because I don't want to accidentally gloss over something. I'm obviously extremely familiar with how DSpace works, and so it's possible that I accidentally will gloss over something that is not necessarily as straightforward as I may think it is. I've tried to make it all relatively simple to walk through so we can kind of learn together, but I encourage you to ask questions and stop me if needed. So to get started with, obviously this is sort of the basic DSpace homepage. Your DSpaceDirect instance will look very similar to this. Like I'd mentioned, your theme may be a little different. You may have different logos or headers up at the top. You may have your side menu may be on the left rather than the right or look a little bit different. But all of the options are the same because it's the same sort of software. But to kind of give you an overview of the sections that are available and an overview of what DSpace provides in general, it's worth kind of looking at what's on this homepage. So we kind of have the top level introductory information here. This is sort of like the welcome text, the introductory text. It's something that you have the ability to customize through us, though we do need to kind of add it in for you. DSpace does, but you're welcome to kind of tweak the little introductory text here in a way that makes sense for your DSpaceDirect instance and just let us know what sort of things you want to put in there. As you can see from this example, you can put hyperlinks in there, you can bold text, you can create lists. It's kind of just basic, website text, HTML text. Immediately below that in the center section is a list of the top-level communities. As I had mentioned, that's the top level of the hierarchy within DSpace. You have communities, collections, and items. So that's sort of the introductory into your DSpace site is these top-level communities. And so it's something to think about when you're organizing your individual site as to what sort of things you want to appear at that top level. And because that top level alone is what appears on this home page. You get a search box, which is also available up in the upper right or upper left, depending on where your menu is, of every single page within DSpace. Obviously, that's providing you a way to quickly search the content. And then there's a recently added section, which basically gives a list of some recent materials that have been put into this particular DSpaceDirect instance. And it's worth mentioning that many of the, let's see, can you edit the names of the communities if there is? I saw a pop up there, but I lost it.
Oh, sorry, that was me. I'm wondering, like,
Yes.
Once you name a community, how permanent is that name? Can you go back and?
You can go back and edit community names at any time. So.
Thanks.
Yep. Yeah, and you can. Yeah, that's something you can change. You can kind of mess around with that hierarchy. You can edit community names, collection names, items at any particular time as you want to. So it's nothing that's ever finalized. It's just something to kind of think about how you want to start things out. So that's kind of the center section here to kind of go through what kind of appears on that home page. The menu area, which again could be on the left or could be on the right, depending on how you've wanted things set up, has a lot of the ways to actually find content within this DSpace installation or interact with the system. So you got your search box. You got the ability to browse by some of the major metadata fields within DSpace. So you can actually browse the entire community collection hierarchy by clicking on community and collections. And I'm going to jump to that real quick just to show. This demo site just has one sample community and one collection underneath it. We'll be creating some more content here today during this demo, but it'll show you the entire hierarchy in this particular page. You can browse by the date that things were actually published or issued. You can browse by particular authors, titles, subjects, normal sort of interaction. You have the My Account feature, which allows you to actually log in and perform tasks within DSpace, and we're going to talk much more about that as we get into the demo more. It also allows people to register with your DSpaceDirect account, and I'll talk more about what that means as well within DSpaceDirect as we go forward. There's this area, this menu called Discover, which is sort of similar to the Browse, but it gives you a little bit of a quicker way to jump right into very popular authors in your system or very popular subject areas within your system, or jump to a particular date within the system. And there's a count then of the number of items that match that particular field within your system, so you can jump immediately to that if that's what is of most interest. And finally, down here, you also have RSS feeds. So if your users use RSS readers, or if you use them, this gives you an immediate way to actually get a feed of items that are added to your repository as things are added in. It lets you know what the recently added items are. One thing to mention here to be aware of is that a lot of these sections here within the home page also appear throughout the entire DSpace site, but they are context aware. And what I mean by that is if you're at a particular community within it, they're based on that particular community you're within. If you're at a particular collection within DSpace, they're based on the collection that you're in. So it's hard to see that a little bit within this particular demo site, but if I browse to the sample community here, which this is sort of a splash page for a community. It's sort of the home page for a community. You'll notice that some other options immediately start to appear within the side menu. And actually, it looks like there's a bug here. It says this collection, but it's supposed to say this community. Sorry, live demo here. But essentially, it allows you to search within the particular community or collection that you're at. It allows you to immediately browse content within that particular community and collection, so you're not necessarily browsing all of DSpace at once, but now you can browse within that community and collection. The Discover options here actually then limit you down to what's within that particular community or within collections underneath that community. So since I only have one community and collection within this demo site, you can't really see that happening here within the demo, at least not yet. Once we create more content, we'll be able to see that a little bit better. But essentially this becomes community specific or collection specific once you browse down to an individual community or an individual collection. The same with the RSS feeds. The RSS feeds are then community specific or collection specific. And even the recent submissions listing becomes community specific or collection specific as you're moving around within the system. So it is, a lot of these things are similar features throughout DSpace. It'll become very familiar once you get familiar with the general layout as you're browsing around. But it is kind of understanding where you are within the system and changing the content that you're seeing appropriately based on where you are within the system. So that's one thing I did want to mention here real quick. So are there any high-level questions, any more high-level questions there having to do with this sort of hierarchy here, this high-level hierarchy? Because the next step we're going to go into is actually logging in to this demo site as an administrator, and we're going to go through the process of creating a community, creating a collection, and starting to even add a sample item or two, just to give you an idea of how that happens. But I'll pause here just for a moment to see if there's any other questions that pop to mind. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to go ahead and log into the system. One thing to mention here in terms of logging in to DSpaceDirect, I'm trying to remember with the folks available here on the call whether or not everybody's using just the internal DSpace login, because there's several actual options that you were able to choose from. You can also hook up DSpace to an LDAP, a local LDAP directory, or Shibboleth, or other sort of external authentication systems. But what I'm going to be demoing here is sort of the internal, out-of-the-box DSpace login system. So it might look slightly different based on how your particular DSpaceDirect is set up. If you're connected up to LDAP or Shibboleth, it'll log in through there rather than through DSpace itself. But visiting the login system here, I've got it auto-filling out my administrator information and password just for ease of use, so I can immediately sign in here and show you how everything works out. You'll also see there is a ability here from the login page or clicking directly on the register link on the side to register within a DSpaceDirect instance. It is important to note here that anybody in the world technically could register within your DSpaceDirect instance, but registration does absolutely nothing, gives them no extra permissions whatsoever until you as an administrator decide to give them extra permissions. Before that, if you don't give them any extra permissions, the only thing they can really do upon registering is they can sign up with a particular collection to get email notifications when new items are added to that collection. So it's not anything that spammers can somehow take control or anything like that. It's just a way to allow people to immediately create an account if they want to. And it's also an easier way to create an account sometimes than having your administrative user go in and manually create accounts for people. So that's why that option is there. Just to click over there to the registration process. It is a several-step registration process. The first thing you do have to do to register is actually enter in a valid email address. And to make sure that you're not a spammer or something, it's actually going to email that person at that email address with a unique link that you have to click on within that particular email in order to actually create your DSpaceDirect account within your system and also set up your password and all that sort of stuff. So it's a several stage process to try and avoid spammers or people just trying to sign up just for the heck of it. So that's kind of how the general registration process works. For people who are using LDAP or Shibboleth, if you had hooked up to an external authentication system, the registration system actually is unnecessary because the LDAP and Shibboleth authentication, when you log in through LDAP or Shibboleth, it'll actually automatically register you within DSpace behind the scenes so that the users don't even have to go through that process by default. So I just wanted to overview that briefly. But we're going to go into the actual login, and I'm going to log in now as an administrative user. So I've logged in. As you can see up here in the top right, I'm now logged in as a user called Demo Administrator. It is worth mentioning there's several levels of user accounts that are available within DSpace, or several different major roles that are available in DSpace. When you just register with an account, like I mentioned, you don't really get any special permissions. You just have a basic user role. However, administrators, top-level administrators, which is what I am now, the system-wide administrators, have the ability to delegate other sort of permissions to users, and we'll be going through those as we go through the system. They can delegate permissions at individual community levels, individual collection levels, or you can give other people full site-wide administrative access. So there are different levels within that hierarchy that you're allowed to give different access rights to, and we'll kind of go through that as we go here. Some other things immediately appear as soon as I've logged into DSpace. One thing that all users are going to see when you log into DSpace, assuming you've been given permissions for some of this, is that you'll immediately see a My Account area here. It has your profile information, which is just very basic information about your email address that you're signed up with, what you want your name to appear as. If you want to enter in a contact telephone, you can. It's completely optional, and it's really only for your site-wide administrators to contact the users via if you wanted to store that within DSpace. Some people use it, some people don't use it ever. You can specify your preferred language within DSpace. Right now, DSpaceDirect is only supporting English because that's what DSpace supports out of the box, but we're working on adding other languages that you can actually specify here as well, because that's stuff that's coming up within DSpace. And as I'd mentioned, at a basic out-of-the-box level, when you sign up with an account, you can sign up for email subscriptions from particular collections that you're allowed to subscribe to. So you could actually say that any new item that's added to a particular collection, I want to be emailed about. And you'll receive those, it says here within the text, you receive daily email alerts. And you can also sign up via RSS feeds if you wanted to, instead of doing emails. You can change your password, and it also gives you a very brief overview of some of the authorization groups that you're within inside DSpace to give you an idea of what permissions you have within the system. The main administrator group is the site-wide administrator, so this particular account is a site-wide administrative user. So going back, there's also a page on the My Accounts area for submissions, which is essentially for people who are allowed to add content into DSpace. This won't appear for everybody. If you're a basic user and you cannot add content into DSpace, you won't be able to add anything. But if you can add content to DSpace, if you've been given that right at either a collection level or at a community, any collection within a community, or even site-wide level, then you'll have the ability within this submission area to actually start a new submission, add a new item within the DSpace. And going through that process, which we'll go through later on here, you can actually decide what collection you're adding that item into. And you also get an overview here of things that are unfinished. So at any point in time, you can save things that you've been working on and come back and restart them from this submission page. There will also be other options here that will appear dynamically depending on whether you want to utilize them, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. It kind of comes up with approval workflows. You can decide whether or not certain collections require approval workflows, and I'll get into that a little bit more later on. Just wanted to let you know that this is part of the My Account area. The other area
is the collection.
Go ahead.
Is the collection? This is Shoshana. Is the collection of sample items, is that a way that people control the workflow so you go live with an entire collection all at once? Are people seeing the unfinished submissions people aren't seeing publicly?
Correct.
And so, for example, the Wild Wild West collection of sample items, is that one of the potential uses, or is it more like a verification for other people that are sending in content? So it could be an additional step that an administrator has to look at it before it gets into the collection.
It's more of the latter, and we'll go through that when we create a collection. At a collection level, you can decide whether or not somebody first has to approve things before they become live and available on the web. And you can decide that at a collection-by-collection basis. So some collections you could decide that as soon as somebody finishes their submission, it becomes immediately live on the web. Other collections you could say have to go through an approval process, in which case one or more people get an automated email with it when anything is added there, and they have to actually go through and make sure that it's okay to be made available publicly. So all I'm showing here right now is actually these are things that I started to submit and I never completed. So they're not even into that approval process yet. I'll talk a bit more about the approval process and how that works later on, but this is just stuff that I started off a submission and I started entering in some information, but maybe I got busy or I got distracted by a phone call or something, and I either left my computer and it never got finished, or I clicked the save button and said I just want to save at this point in time, and I'll complete it later on. But essentially what this is showing here is that DSpace is saving all of your work as you're starting to put stuff in, so that even if you don't complete something, the basics of what you had started will be saved within DSpace, and you can go back and restart that from the point you left off in order to continue your work, essentially.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, we'll get into a little bit more of that as we go. Okay, so as an administrative user, as a site-wide administrative user, I also have this administrative menu over here as well, which only site-wide administrative users see. So these are things that only the site-wide administrators can do within the system. And it's things like, adding access controls, which we'll talk about some more, and dealing with content within the system, different types of items and withdrawn items or private items, which I'll talk about more, and other sort of things within the system, which we'll get in a little bit more as we go through this demo. But that menu only appears to those site-wide administrative users. Okay, we're going to go back to the home page right now. And from the home page, as a logged-in user, since I'm an admin user, and even if I wasn't a site-wide admin user, if I have extra rights within the system at different levels within the system, a special box will start to appear as you start to browse around, which is called the context box. And the context box basically tells you things that you have access to do within that particular page. So right now I'm at sort of the site-wide level. I'm at the home page. And so something I can do at that home page level is I can create a new community, since I'm a site-wide administrator. To show how this sort of changes briefly before we get into that, if I was at a community level and I browse, I think my browser has cached things. Yeah, sorry, I had to refresh my browser. It had cached the page for me. But now at a community level, I have a context page that allows me to actually edit that community. I can do some exporting options, or I can create a collection underneath that community or a sub-community underneath that community. And so this context box basically tells you what rights you have in that particular area. And we'll get more into that as we create communities and collections, which is the next thing we're going to go do right now. So I'll go back to the home page, and I'm going to create a community at that top level. So at any point in time, as I had mentioned, you can edit any of this community information. This is just to get you started, and you can go back and tweak it as you want to later on. But every community must have a name. You need to have some sort of name about that community. And everything else here is essentially optional. So for this particular example, let's just create a departmental community. So let's say we'll do a Department of Physics. So we have a Department of Physics community that we're going to create. The short description just allows you to give a very brief blurb about this community. It's meant to be sort of a very brief short description, because it's when you're searching DSpace or browsing DSpace, when you're searching DSpace, you're also searching community names and information about communities, and so this short description kind of gives people a very basic overview of what that community's purpose is. And it doesn't really appear other than in searching and browsing around, just so you get a basic sense of the community purpose. If the community purpose is already pretty much explained through the name, you don't really need to have a short description. It's totally optional. But you could add a brief blurb here. You could say, this is a community for all physics department content, or whatever you want to say within that short blurb. And then the introductory text, a lot of these other fields here support HTML. You don't have to use HTML. You can just write in plain text if you want. But it's worth noting that if you wanted to add things like links or even like a bulleted list or anything like that, you could actually add in HTML tags here to add that content into there. There's nothing, DSpace is not really smart enough to tell you if you have invalid HTML, so it's almost kind of like you try it and you save it, and if it looks really bad, you go back and edit it and tweak it again. Unfortunately, DSpace is not a full sort of content management system, so it's not trying to check the validity of your HTML. It's just going to try and display exactly what you put in here in terms of your introductory text and all of that. So for this basic example, I'm not going to add a whole lot of content in these fields, but I'm just going to add a little bit of stuff so you can kind of see where it gets displayed, and we can talk about it a little bit after this. So we got our intro text for our community. If your community has a particular copyright information that you need to have in it, this is available also at a collection level. I should mention creating a collection is actually very similar to creating a community. So you get a lot of these same fields, and you can add similar sort of information within a collection. So when we get to that as well, you'll see very similar sort of things. But copyright here at either a community or a collection level basically essentially allows you to add some sort of copyright statement if you need to. So some institutions may have a collection or a community that does represent, say, an electronic journal or an issue of a journal, or even student dissertations or something like that. So you could add a little copyright statement if you wanted to into there to say, you know, all content within this community or all content within this collection is copyright, you know, this journal publisher, or copyright, you know, the university of whatever. If you wanted to add that, you can add that in. It's not necessary because some folks just add a general sort of copyright statement maybe at the site-wide level, or they don't even necessarily bother with it because that information is kind of within the files themselves. It's not anything you need to add, but it's something to be aware of that you can add. So we could say this collection or this community contains materials that are copyright the University of DSpace. So you can add whatever sort of copyright statement you want, and that copyright statement will appear on that community homepage then. You also have the option to add sort of a little news area if you wanted to have ongoing news or just some sort of other sort of text on that page. This is totally optional as well. A lot of people end up using the introductory text more as sort of an intro to the community and what the things are about, and don't really heavily use the news, but it is an option that you can utilize as you see fit. So recent news. And you also have the option to add a community logo if you wanted to. Most sites don't necessarily use this very heavily if you're creating communities that represent departments per se, because departments may not have their own individual logos. But if you were creating a community or a collection that represented a journal or an issue of a journal, you might actually have a logo that's associated with that journal, or some other group, a research group maybe, they have some sort of official logo, I don't know. You can add a logo basically that then appears on that community homepage or that collection homepage. For this purpose, I'm not going to add a logo because I just didn't have one ready, but I'll show you on our other sample community there was a logo available there. So then we just go ahead and create our community here. So after I've created the community, it does end up popping me directly into the edit page. So you can immediately go into to editing and assigning roles if you wanted to. That's basically sort of a quick way to stay in the administrative aspects of this particular community or collection and assign permissions to it. But some people do find it a little bit odd that you're jumped right into editing again rather than going directly to the individual community page. It's just worth noting that's kind of how it works with DSpace. So you can go back and edit any of this information that we have filled out. You obviously have the ability then to update it if you've actually edited anything. You can delete it at any time. Return just brings you back to our list of communities, and you can see the Department of Physics now exists as a community within this demo site. And if we click on our Department of Physics, we're going to get the basic browse by information. We get the intro text that we had entered in, which is just that basic information. The news section is immediately under that intro text, and we have our little copyright statement that has to do with that particular community. If we had added a logo, it essentially appears right up here above the intro text. So if we went back to our list of communities and go to the sample community, there's actually a DSpace logo attached to this particular community, and a little bit more of an intro text blurb with some HTML in it to add a link and add some bold text and all that sort of stuff. The same news section, and here there's a little bit of HTML in the copyright statement to make it appear in italics. But it's the same sort of idea here, of course. So going back to our Department of Physics community, once we've created our community and we're at that community homepage, we of course can go back into editing the community, or we can create a sub-community or a collection underneath this community. So if we go back into that edit screen which we were at, it gives all our basic information which we already filled out. It also has two other tabs available to us here. We have the Assign Roles, which is how you actually assign any sort of permissions within DSpace. And the same tab appears at the community level and at the collection level. So you can assign roles, as I had mentioned, at that community level or at that collection level. For the community level, clicking on this tab only allows you one role within a community, because that's the only thing that DSpace supports. It allows you the idea of a community administrator. And so there's a nice little blurb and explanation of what a community administrator can actually do within a community. Essentially, they basically have this administrative rights at that community level or on anything that's underneath that community within the hierarchy. So that includes any sub-communities or collections or items that exist within collections that are within that community. So it allows you to basically delegate permissions. So some institutions may use this role to actually allow individual departments to have administrative rights within their particular community. So you could say that somebody at the Department of Physics in this case can be a community administrator and can manage the hierarchy of content or all of the collections within that Department of Physics community. So they can easily manage and maintain things there. It's totally optional, of course. You don't have to give these permissions out, just available to you there. And if you did want to give those permissions, you click on the Create button, and you actually then assign those permissions to individual groups within the system or individual users within the system. You can add them to that community administrative group. So I'm going to go ahead and click that just to show you essentially what happens here. Is that it's created a specialized group within the DSpace system which relates specifically to this particular community. The name is a little bit odd, and some people do find it a little bit weird, the naming convention that comes up with these specialized groups, but essentially it's just how DSpace manages roles. At all times you'll have a link here to be able to see what community does this actually refer to, because the name is so weird looking. And here you can actually go in and then add people or groups to this particular community to give them those rights within that community. For this example, I'm not going to go ahead and do that just because we'll talk a little bit more about getting people and groups into the system later on. So we'll touch back on this later in much more detail. So looking at my time, I'm already at an hour. Wow. Okay. So we'll move a little bit more quickly. Collections will come a little bit more easy after looking at communities. The Curate tab actually provides some options to be able to run basic reports and sort of tasks across the content within a community. So for most people in DSpaceDirect world, you only have one option of the type of tasks that are available to you here, these general purpose ones. And they're basically sort of reporting tasks. some people find them useful, some people may not use them quite as much, but it's kind of just available to you as an administrator or as a community administrator in this case. So one thing you could run is you could run a task to actually get a report of all of the file formats within this community. So it'll tell you like how many PDFs, how many Word documents, how many HTML documents or whatever you have within that community. And it kind of gives you an idea of just what sort of content's in there. You can also run a report to check to make sure that all of the items underneath this community or any collection in the community have all of the required metadata fields filled out with some sort of information. This report's usually only useful if you've loaded content from a different location, like if we've helped you move content from a different system over to DSpace, or you've done some sort of bulk load, or you've added new metadata fields or something, or asked for new metadata fields to be added and changed which ones are required, then you can basically run this report so you can clean up content that is missing some sort of required metadata field. There's also the ability to check all of the URLs or links that are in metadata, so you can check to make sure none of them are broken. And if so, you can go and fix those links if you want to. So it's just some basic reporting tools. For users who end up, if you ever wanted to, we actually can connect your DSpaceDirect up to DuraCloud, our other DuraSpace service, and in which case you can actually then perform backup tasks from this interface. You can actually end up backing up content and restoring content to and from DuraCloud from various tasks, but I'm not going to go through that here. Just something to be aware of that's an option. So that's creating a community. That's the basics of creating a community and the options that are available to you there. And so now we're going to go down one more level here, and we're going to create a collection within this particular community. And you'll see the process is pretty similar, but we're going to have some additional options here, because at the collection level you can start to define some extra roles and extra responsibilities. So we'll create a collection now. And since I clicked on Create a Collection underneath that particular community, I'm creating it under that community. It's understanding the hierarchy here. So, so I'm entering the metadata for a new collection underneath the Department of Physics. And in this case, I'm going to create one that's, let's see, Physics Dissertations. So we can add a collection underneath here. Again, I could add a short description if I wanted to. I'm going to just skip over that for time's sake. We can do introductory text. Again, same sort of information. Again, you can add copyright text. You can add news. A lot of this is the exact same information as you can add into a community level. A couple different fields here near the bottom. You have the ability at a collection level to specify a custom license for that collection. What this license is essentially the deposit license that anybody depositing content into this collection needs to sort of sign off on. This is actually pretty much rarely used within DSpace for most institutions, because most institutions have a deposit license that is for their entire DSpace. That's the default one that we asked you to kind of start to think about when you signed up for DSpaceDirect. But if individual collections required a different type of license, you could actually just paste that license text directly into this field, and then anybody depositing into that collection would see that different license text rather than the default one. Some cases where this could be useful is if you actually did have if you were storing like an e-journal or some sort of published content in there or something, you may actually want to have a slightly different license, a deposit license for adding content into either that e-journal or to a particular collection for other reasons. So not widely used, but just worth knowing about. The provenance field is really an administrative field. It's more meant just as kind of a general notes field to yourself or to other administrators to kind of describe where this collection came from if you wanted to. I mean, it's totally optional. You don't need to put anything in there if you don't want to. But you could add something in there like saying, you know, this collection was originally in some other system and we've migrated it over here as of this date or whatever. It's basically just allowing you to understand a little bit of where the collection came from, or add just any informational notes that you want to give to other administrative users. It's only viewable when you're editing the community. So normal users will never see this provenance information, so it's just an administrative notes field. Again, at a collection level, you can choose to upload a logo if you wanted to. But the only field that is required is that name. Everything else is completely optional. So I'm going to go ahead and create this collection here. Again, I'm jumped into editing that particular collection. I can go back and edit that metadata that I just entered at any level again. I can then go in and assign roles, which as you now see, there are additional roles at a collection level. The community level only had that administrative role. There's different roles here that are worth kind of going through. There's also some good explanations underneath each of the roles. So there's a submitters group that you can actually define what particular users or groups within the DSpace system can add new content to this specific collection. So you can decide that on a collection by collection basis. So that's frequently used to just, better control who you want to add content and to who you want to be able to add content to specific collections. There's a default read access sort of role or permission level. This is not used very frequently within DSpace, but it is an option to be aware of. Essentially what this lets you do is it lets you say that any content that gets submitted to this collection is automatically not publicly viewable. It's only viewable to a particular group or a particular, it's usually a particular group. You could do particular people, individual e-people if you wanted to, but usually you define it to a particular group. Some cases where that might be useful, I guess, is if you were creating a research group collection, and that research group, maybe their content they're generating should not actually be available off campus. Maybe it's only available to on-campus users. So you could create a group of on-campus users and actually then say that default read access, the people who can read content from this collection, are only those people within that group. But it's not used very heavily. The one thing to be aware of here is that it only takes effect from the point that you add it from this screen. What that means is essentially if you've already had content that's been submitted in, that content does not suddenly become access restricted because it obeys the previous read access permissions. You can go back in and edit that content and restrict it if you wanted to, but this is something to kind of set up early on in the process because you want it to be set up from the collection in the get-go so that everything sort of gets that same read access permission. There are ways to do some bulk editing of permissions within DSpace as well if you really needed to do that cleanup later on. So some of these last three groups here are related to the idea of accepting and rejecting content that is coming into this particular collection. So this is that idea of if any of these three groups are created, these steps are actually created within the collection, then anything that comes into that collection, anything that's deposited by users will immediately go into some sort of approval process. So it won't become publicly available right away. It goes into sort of a holding area where somebody needs to review it and then mark it as okay to become publicly available. There's up to 3 approval processes you can do. You can do 1, 2, or 3 of them. It's totally up to you. But the steps always appear in this particular order. So if you did all 3 of them, the first step that will occur is that there will be an accept-reject process where somebody will review it and say this is accepted and can move along within the workflow, or it's immediately rejected. And those are the only 2 options available. So when you add people to this step, essentially what happens is all of those people will receive an email that says new content has been added. We would ask you to go and review this. And only one of those people that receive the email actually goes in and claims it. So the first person to claim it gets to do the work. But essentially somebody goes in and says, okay, I'll perform this task. And they claim that particular step, and then they just say whether they accept it or reject it, and they get to review all of the metadata and the files and everything about it to make that decision. If they accept it, then you'd move on to the next step in the process if there are any more. If there's no more steps in the process, the accept from this step would immediately make it publicly available. But the next step then would be accept, reject, edit metadata, which should be relatively straightforward. It's still accept, reject, or you could go in and actually tweak the metadata fields if you wanted to enhance the metadata, add extra subjects or whatever. You can do that before it becomes public. And then the final step is essentially a step where it's assumed that it's gone through some sort of acceptance period beforehand, and so this last step is kind of for like local catalogers or local metadata experts to go in and do some final tweaks to the metadata before it becomes public. So you could add them to this group so they only have the ability to tweak the metadata, but they can't stop it from becoming public after they're done with those edits. It's already assumed to have been accepted or rejected previously. If a rejection ever takes place, essentially the person who deposited that content is immediately notified that it's been rejected, and you enter in an explanation as to why it's been rejected. And that person can resubmit it then later on if it's something that they just needed to clean up major or add a different file to it. They could clean it up and then resubmit it for a review process again, and once they resubmit it, it starts over the review process. So those are kind of the basics at a collection level of the various roles that are available. Again, there's some explanation here about what these do. We also have some explanation on the knowledge base, and we'll be working on enhancing that even more around how you can utilize these steps. The other tabs up here to be aware of, you have that same Curate tab. I'm not going to go over that here because it's the exact same as the community. There's also a content source tab, which you're probably not ever going to touch, so you don't really need to mess around with it, but essentially it allows you to define whether or not it's a standard DSpace collection, in which case people are just going to add content into it as normal, which is really what most people do. 99% of DSpace collections are always that. The only reason you'd ever select the other option is if your DSpace instance was actually auto-harvesting its content from another location. And that's something that is pretty rare. It usually only happens at really large institutions that are trying to basically aggregate content from lots of different other sources, in which case DSpace can actually do some auto-harvesting via a protocol called OAI-PMH to pull things in and actually allow you to create these sort of dynamic collections. But most cases, you just leave it as is. And if you ever have questions about that, we'll add extra materials about that as well. And there's other links we can give to you about tutorials about how to get that working if you ever wanted to do that harvesting. So that's the basics of creating a collection. We've created a collection within the system. And I'm going to go and hit the return. And so now we have our Department of Physics, and we've got our physics theses and dissertations collection underneath it. So if I browse now to that particular collection, since I'm a site-wide administrator, I have full rights to do anything within that collection. So my context information down here again is I can edit that collection, jump back into that. I can do some item mapping, and this is where you can actually link items between other collections. It's basically a tool to allow you to say, I've added these items to this other collection, but I also want to cross-link them over here as well. So that's what that item mapper tool allows you to do. You can do some exporting options, which I'll talk about here in just a moment, but that's kind of the basics at the collection level. I can also, since I'm a site-wide administrator, submit content directly into this collection. So this new link appeared on the collection page. And that's based on your rights within that collection. If you have been given submit or access within that collection, you'll see that link in those collections that you've been given those rights to. But if you haven't been given those rights, that link obviously does not appear. So that's how we actually start to get content within the system at this point in time. And that's where what we're going to go into next is actually adding a new item. Did I hear somebody about to ask a question? I can pause here for a moment before we jump into this. Okay.
Hey, Tim, yes. Sorry, Tim, it's Val. I know you still have quite a bit to cover, and I was wondering if people could stay on a little past 2. because I think it's going to be, you tell me, Tim, but I think it's going to be difficult to finish everything by 2.
Yeah.
I am personally not. I'm Warren from Verified Voting, but I think Corrine from Verified Voting is on, so we're okay.
And it will be recorded too. So.
Yes,
exactly.
I'm on.
I'll be
I'm
posting
here.
the recording. Okay, so for those of you who can stick around, please do until Tim is able to finish. But for those of you who have other calls or other obligations, I will be posting the recording later today. So I'll send that out in a follow-up email later this afternoon.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, so before we get into submitting an item, it's just worth mentioning there's 2 ways to get items into the system. You can either browse to a specific collection and click this link here, or as I had shown you before, there's a submissions area in your My Account, and from that area you can actually click the Start Another Submission option. From this option, you get a list of all the collections you have access to submit to. So as an administrator, you're going to see a list of every single collection here if you're a site-wide administrator. If you're only able to submit to particular collections, this list will be much smaller, obviously. So we'll go ahead and submit a new file or item into this new collection we created. Okay, and so DSpace has a multi-step submission process here. As I had mentioned, at any point in time you could pause and come back to this later on. There's a Save and Exit button at the very bottom to allow you to save where you're currently at and come back later on through that same submissions link to continue where you had left off. Excuse me. Also, it's worth noting that any time you transition to another page, it's automatically saving your work for you. So that means that if you step away from your computer or something, or you get distracted by a phone call or whatever, your work up to that point will have been automatically saved. So you don't need to worry about losing everything you've done if you get pulled away. But the submission process starts off here with a set of initial questions. Actually, one more thing to mention briefly before we get into this. It is possible, if your institution wanted it, to slightly tweak this particular workflow of how many steps are involved here at the top, or even the ordering of the particular steps. That is possible to do. However, at this point in time, we're still working on the costing model for that for DSpaceDirect, because it does take a little bit of work behind the scenes to swap things around. Depending on the level of what sort of customizations you'd like to add in, it may not cost that much, but more enhanced, larger changes may cost more, but we'll get back to you on those sort of things. I'm just letting you know that it is possible to ask for some tweaks here if you need them for your submission process. But this is the default one. It starts out with a list of initial questions, which essentially start to gather some very basic information as to what sort of information we need to ask for in the metadata screens, in the describe screens. So whether or not there's multiple titles, if it's been translated or something like that, or whether or not it's been published before. So these are totally optional. And I should mention most of these fields are completely optional. I'll let you know for ones that are not optional. So I'll say this one's published before. Actually, no, since this is a dissertation, it has not been published. So we're getting into the basic describing of this item. So author, title, basic information. The only reason this is split up into 2 different pages is just to allow for not too much scrolling of information. It could be on one page if you really wanted it to be, but this is the default of how DSpace does things. So you can enter in the author name. I'm just going to add myself in here as the primary author. If you wanted to add multiple authors, you can click the Add button here and then continue to add additional authors here. So I can add Val into here as an additional author. And then you can obviously remove authors as you go. So we add a title. If it's part of some sort of series or a report number, you can add that information in here, and you can add multiple of those if you wanted to. Any sort of identifiers you have around this particular item, if there's an ISBN, if it's a book, ISSN, other sort of identifiers, you can add them in here, or even just URLs or links. If you wanted to add a link to this content, if it's available at another location or something like that, you're welcome to add that in here. Again, you can add multiple of them. Any of these ones that have add buttons, you can add multiple versions of. The type of items, you can describe whether or not it's like an article, book, whatever. You can select multiple here by holding down either the control button or shift. So I could say, I'm holding down control right now and selecting other ones, or you can just select a single one. Again, these are all optional. The only field here that actually is not optional is the title. You must enter some sort of title in. So even the author information is potentially optional if there really is no author for that particular work. But we do need some sort of title. You can specify what language it is. And there's some basic languages here that are specified. We can add more as needed. But you get that out of the box. And then we can move along here. We can step back within the process at any time. So you can go to the previous step. Again, you can save and exit, or you can continue on. As you may note up here at the top, we have grayed out steps which we haven't visited. And we have steps back here which are now kind of blue, which are ones we have visited. You actually can click on those. Those are sort of buttons or links, so you can jump back if you suddenly remember something. There will be a review process later on where you get to review everything on one page, but you're welcome to jump between pages as much as you need to. So you can add various subject keywords around this particular item, obviously, as many as you want. DSpace does come with some basic subject categories that you can search through. These are not really enhanced per se, but there are some categories here that you're welcome to add in and use if you want to. If you don't want those there, you don't have to have them there as well. It just comes with DSpace out of the box. It allows you to kind of have more of a controlled vocabulary having to do with some subject areas. So we're going to go ahead and remove that for now. You get your abstract. Again, all of these fields are optional. I should mention all of this metadata is being stored behind the scenes in a qualified Dublin core. That's just the metadata standard that DSpace adheres to. So even though they appear as just sort of general metadata fields, they are kind of being put into more specific Dublin core fields behind the scenes. You can add sponsors or funding codes, any sort of extra description or comments around this item that are beyond the basic abstract. Again, all of these fields are completely optional. Then you get to the point where you can actually upload one or more files. So this is where you're actually uploading those bitstreams or files within DSpace. You can upload 0 or more files, so you do not even have to upload files if this particular item only links off to something that's available elsewhere on the web, or links off to a website, describes something. You don't need to have files in DSpace, but a lot of times people do because they're putting PDFs or something in there. So we can go ahead and choose a file. I'm going to go to my desktop here and just grab my PowerPoint presentation. So we got my PowerPoint presentation. If you want, you can give an optional description around it. This is just kind of to help describe, differentiate multiple files if there are multiple files. So you can say, this particular file is the actual presentation file, or maybe it's a video of the presentation, or whatever. It's totally optional again. If the file in question requires some sort of embargo, this is where it's more having to deal with published content or stuff that may not be published but may not necessarily, you may not be allowed to be able to give immediate public access to. You can actually embargo individual files until a particular date has passed. So This isn't necessarily used for all content, but it can be very important, sometimes even for dissertations or content of that nature. If your institution's policy is that a student's dissertation is not allowed to be available on the web immediately, but it can be available maybe a year after the student has graduated, or whatever other policies you may have, you can essentially set the date here that this file becomes publicly available. Until that date has passed, the metadata in DSpace appears, so people could find the item from the metadata, but they will not be able to download the file. The file will only be available to administrative users within your DSpace instance. But as soon as that date does pass, the file becomes publicly available if the collection has public permissions on it, or if you had set a different sort of read access permissions on the collection, it becomes available to that group of users who are supposed to be able to download stuff from that collection. So this is sort of a powerful feature when it comes to stuff that's been published before or requires some sort of embargo. Again, it's totally optional. If you do enter an embargo date, it's recommended to add some sort of reason behind the embargo, just so that you can go and refer to that later on as needed. But it's more of an administrative field, just remind you why there is embargo on this content. So if I want to upload multiple files, I can click on Upload this file and add another, in which case I can just select a new file and add another description, decide whether it needs an embargo, and continue on from there and keep adding files if I felt like it. If you only have one file, you can click just on the Next button and move along here within the process. So at this point in time, I get to the review process, where I'm basically reviewing a summary of everything I've entered, and I can jump back to correct any of the information that I've entered so far. Obviously, as I'd mentioned, at any point in time, we can save and exit out of here and restart. I've also been automatically, behind the scenes, DSpace is saving all of the stuff I've gotten so far. So if I left my computer, I could start back from here later on at a different time. But this just gives you a last chance to review everything. So we'll move along. Here is where the deposit license comes into play. So what I'm showing here right now is just a default deposit license that DSpace comes with. But it is important for your institution to decide what sort of deposit license you want to put in place. You are more than welcome to basically copy this default one from DSpace and just change the university, the dummy university names into your university name. It is worth noting that this deposit license is actually word from word the MIT deposit license that they use for their particular DSpace installation. So it is a valid deposit license, and it does give you some security there. The main goal of this license is to give you, as the sort of stewards of your DSpaceDirect instance, rights to do things like actually reproduce this content or allow people to download it. It's a safety mechanism to ensure that should, say, you decide to give deposit rights to all of the professors at your university or all of the people who work for your individual company. If you want to give them all deposit rights and somebody accidentally uploads something that actually is copyrighted and you are told to take down, which I've never really heard happening, but it could happen, this gives you some protection that you're basically ensuring that the person who deposited this content is trying to give you the sort of access rights that you need. And you can say, oh, I didn't know that this was copyrighted. I'll just take it down immediately. We were told otherwise, because this agreement kind of implies that they have the rights to be able to give you this work. So that's kind of what that's in there for. But anybody who's depositing content into DSpace must sign off on your deposit license. They cannot continue and complete the submission until they check this, I grant this license. It is worth noting that as soon as they grant this license and click on Complete Submission, an exact copy of the text of this license is actually attached to and follows along with the item that this particular thing is, that all this content is going into. And it's actually becomes sort of an electronically signed copy of that license that you can go back to and refer to if you ever needed to. And it's electronically signed with the email address of the person who has deposited this particular item, as well as the date that they basically signed off on this license and completed the submission. So it's sort of a way to keep track of that license information within your DSpace instance. So I'm going to go ahead and complete this submission now. The submission complete page then kind of tells you that the next steps is that, it may now go through a review process for this collection, If the particular collection that you have submitted to does not have a review process, then that particular item will become immediately available within the DSpace system. In this case, I did submit to a brand new collection we had created that we did not set up any sort of review process for. So if we went back to either our list of titles, we can browse all the titles, and here's our sample dissertation here that we just created, and basic author information. The date here was automatically generated from DSpace as today's date. If I had said it was published before, then I would have had to actually enter in a date that this particular work was published, and you get the basic blurb of the abstract for that particular item. And if I go to that particular item, then I actually get a link to the PowerPoint file where I can go and download that file. And all of that sort of information. At any time as an administrator, or if you're a community or collection administrator, you can go in and edit any of those items that you have administrative control over. So the edit screen is slightly different because it gives you a little bit more power than that usual submission process. It gives you more capabilities for things you can do. So this gives you an idea of some of the basic things that you can do in editing an item. One thing you can do is you can change the item's authorization. So this is if you actually needed to access restrict things within that item. Most of the time you don't necessarily need to go in and do that, but it's worth noting that that's there. The withdrawal allows you to immediately withdraw something from the repository if there is question about copyright, or if you notice something that somehow got into your repository that may not necessarily need to be there or needs some sort of more review. Essentially what that withdrawal does is it immediately removes the item from what's called the DSpace archive, the sort of archive area within DSpace, and puts it in sort of a temporary place, back into sort of like a review place. And it also makes it private at the same point in time. So it no longer is available on the web, and it gets thrown into a review bucket, which is actually accessible from your administrative menu, the withdrawn items bucket here. Where you can go in then and do a more thorough review and decide whether or not that item really should be reinstated, in which case there becomes a reinstate button here where you can reinstate and undo the withdrawal, or you can keep it as withdrawn or whatever you want to do. But withdrawal is essentially something you can undo. You can move items to another collection. If it got deposited to the wrong place, you can move it to another location. You can just make that item private, and this is slightly different than the withdrawn in that it just kind of puts access restrictions on it so that only administrators can access this item, but it still kind of is available through the web interface. It's just only there to administrators. So it's a slightly different tweak on withdrawing things. Or you can permanently delete that, and that's the only step here that is completely permanent. If you click that button, that item is gone from the system. And we are not able to restore it for you except by going to like backups, essentially, from your DSpaceDirect system. So you only really want to permanently delete something if you're really sure that this is a bad item or whatever. It really should not be there. Otherwise, it's recommended to either withdraw it or make it private if it's something you think you might need to possibly undo at some point in time, because both of those can be undone at a time in the future. But those are the basic controls at the higher level for items. You can also edit the item's bitstreams or upload new ones, and these are the individual files. So we got our PowerPoint file. If there were multiple files here, I could actually reorder them by the arrows here to change the order that they appear on the actual item page. So you can specify that maybe the PowerPoint version is more definitive than a PDF version of it or whatever. It just gives you a little bit more control over that item, how the item appears. As you see here, this is that license text file where when I signed off on a deposit license, a copy of that license was automatically attached to this item, and this license text file has my name, my email address on it, and the date that I signed off on that license. So that gives you the ability to go back and review that if you ever needed to in the future. You will notice there's two different things called bundles here. Bundles within DSpace are essentially groups of files. The only place you'll really see them is on this Item Bitstreams tab. The original bundle are the files that were originally uploaded, and they're also the ones that get displayed on the item page within DSpace for download. So you can add, when you add a new bitstream here, if I wanted to add a brand new bitstream, I can select which bundle I want it to go into. And by default, it's going to recommend we put it in those content files because those are the ones that will be downloaded, that original bundle. There are other bundles that can appear in special cases. There was that license bundle where a license can be stored. If you ever have images within your DSpace instance, there will sometimes be thumbnail bundles that are auto-created for you. It just creates a thumbnail version of the images. There can also be other sorts of bundles that are kind of more administrative bundles that are auto-generated by DSpace based on the content that you originally uploaded. So when you upload a PDF, for example, or a Word document, DSpace will create a text bundle where it basically extracts all of the plain text from that PDF or Word document so that it can index it so that you can search within the document in the search box, as well as just giving you another format, a preservation sort of format, so you have a textual-based copy of that document in case the PDF or the Word document ever became corrupted or something like that. So those bundles are kind of worth having a general understanding of, but for the most part, you're really only going to deal with this original bundle and the content within it. You can also edit the item metadata. This is more of a much more administrative view to the metadata. So it's showing you the actual Dublin core fields that are being used within DSpace and allowing you to change the values within them or add new fields. And it's also showing you every single piece of information that DSpace has within this item, including fields that are auto-generated when you initially uploaded that item. So things like the date that it was actually uploaded into DSpace, as well as the date and time that it finished the review process. In this case, those dates are identical because there was no review process. But if there was a review process, these dates may be different. It also has basic information about the actual provenance of this item, where it came from. So it says that it was submitted by this account that I submitted on a particular date. When it was uploaded, it included one file, and that file was a PowerPoint, and here's the checksum and the bytes and all that sort of stuff. So it's basically some preservation level provenance information about this particular item. And more provenance information will get auto-generated by DSpace if you change particular items within DSpace. So if you actually withdraw it and reinstate it, or you make it private, or things like that, other sort of provenance fields will be auto-generated along the line.
Question from the audience, Tim.
Sure.
If someone wanted to upload a hand-signed license agreement from an author, could you do that in the previous tab, the item bitstream area?
Yes, you could. Yeah, and that's actually why there is the ability within this upload new bitstream thing. If you wanted to, you can actually select that I'm going to upload a license, and then you could choose to upload either whatever format that is. You could upload that PDF signed license or whatever sort of signed license agreement into that particular license bundle. And it's worth noting there that a lot of these other bundles are more administrative in nature. They're not things that your users browsing DSpace are going to see. Your users browsing DSpace from the web are only going to see those content files. So these are just more administrative areas that you can add other types of files to the item as needed. Okay, so the item metadata screen kind of gives you that sort of ability to add new metadata fields as you want to, or remove things or clean things up as you see fit. The View Item tab here essentially gives you a preview of what this item is now going to look like. So if you've changed things in the bitstreams area or in the metadata area, you can get a quick preview of what it's going to look like to users within the actual DSpace screen, so that you can jump back and tweak something real quick if you notice you messed something up or whatever. It's just a way to kind of give that preview. And the Curate tab is that same tab that again appeared at the collection and the community level to allow you to run various basic reports across individual items. It actually becomes more important with things like hooking it up to DuraCloud, where it would give you the ability to actually restore an individual item from a DuraCloud backup from that Curate tab if you ever wanted to. So that's the basics of actually going back and editing an item. The one thing to be aware of that sometimes throws people off a little bit is that editing an item is actually only available to sort of administrative users within DSpace. That includes the site-wide administrator, the community administrator, and the collection administrator. So if somebody only has the ability to deposit things into DSpace, if it's like a professor that you want to be able to deposit his research paper, he can deposit things in, but he cannot necessarily go back and edit what he has previously deposited unless you want to give him those administrative rights. So that sometimes throws people off a little bit, but the reason why that was kind of put in place with DSpace to begin with is that DSpace again came a little bit out of the archives world and the library world, where when things are kind of given over to DSpace, into the library, to the archives, they're basically kind of accessioned in and become owned and maintained by that more administrative unit rather than from the individual user who initially submitted the content. So that does throw people off sometimes, and it's worth understanding. It's possible that could change in future versions of DSpace, because there has been talk of changing that to allow individual users to actually go back and edit their content if you wanted them to be able to. But right now that's not a feature. So that's editing items. And I know we're a little bit over time. Those are the main... I should mention the editing items and the communities and collections are really a lot of the things you're going to do most frequently, or adding items into the system. Once you have the communities and collections set up in the system, most of what you'll be messing around with is the actual items themselves, obviously, getting people to add items in and then editing them as needed. So that's a lot of what DSpace does really well. But a little bit more about access controls now, just because I've kind of mentioned them and glossed over them a little bit. In this access control menu, you'll see we have people and we have groups within DSpace. The people are the individual accounts within a DSpace instance. As I had mentioned, if you have DSpace hooked up to either LDAP or Shibboleth or some sort of external thing, these accounts kind of get auto-generated the first time somebody logs in. The first time somebody logs into the system. So if somebody logged in through LDAP, basically DSpace will capture from LDAP some basic information about your LDAP account and auto-create an account for you within DSpace that's based on that same email address. But if you're not using LDAP or Shibboleth, then this is where basically you want to give people rights into the system. You need them to have a DSpace account. They need to have this ePerson set up. There are two ways to set up that ePerson. Like I'd mentioned, you can register from that login page, which will allow people to automatically generate their account. And by default, their account doesn't have any rights, but they can get one into the system that way. And so if you know they already have an account, you could either browse the current ePeople, or you could search for them by either name or email address to find them within the system. You can also, as an administrative user, go in and actually create people one by one. Sometimes, I mean, this is possible, and it's worth doing at some institutions, but a lot of times it can become overwhelming for one person to attempt to add every person's account. It can often be a little bit easier to tell somebody that, here, go to this registration page, register, and get your email address set up, get your password set up, and then let me know once you've done that, and then I'll give you the correct permissions. That's usually the workflow that I recommend to folks just because it's a little bit easier than having to go in and manually enter each of these people one by one into the system. But it is possible to go in. If I click on this, you can go in and put in their email address. The email address for DSpace is used as your login, so there's no separate username. You just always use the email address. The first and last name are only used for the little information up here at the top and for basic display or for capturing things like who signed off on that deposit license. It'll put in your first and last name as well as your email address, things like that. Telephone number is totally optional. It's only available to admin users. And if you create this user from this system, from an administrative thing, you can actually specify whether or not they can log in. Honestly, this is something that you pretty much always want them to be able to kind of log in right away, and the certificates only is mostly not applicable unless you're using certificate-based authentication, which we have to set up behind the scenes for you. But if we wanted to create a new user here, I could create myself with my email address. One thing that's slightly weird in creating a new user through this route is that you'll notice I can't set up this user's password for them yet. So I got to create the user, which is now in the system down here. And then I can go and click on the user and actually send them a reset password email. Or if they've lost their password, you could go in here and edit the user and go click on reset password, which automatically sends them an email so they can reset it. This is something that's being cleaned up more in the next version of DSpace. But again, if you go through the other route of having everybody register and set up their password and then letting you know, you don't have to worry about this sort of oddity in actually setting up users one by one. But that's how you set up a user account within DSpace. And once you have users, the way you actually give them any sort of rights within the system is to add them to groups. So we'll go over to the access groups here. And by default, DSpace comes with only 2 access groups. You have the administrator group, which is the site-wide administrative users, and you have the anonymous group, which is basically what everybody is added to if they don't belong to any other group. So anybody who accesses the system, whether they're logged in or not, is basically an anonymous user. So those are the only 2 groups that start out with. As you create collections and communities, you get these, again, slightly oddly named collection-based and community groups that are auto-generated for you. And they always tell you which community or collection those are referring to, and you get a sense of what the rights are based on the end of it. So this is the admin group for this collection of sample items. You can have a default read group that people can read it by default. Submission, people can submit to that collection. And then some of those workflow groups, which you can get more information about clicking on the actual groups themselves. You can add your own groups here as much as you want, actually. So if you're managing all of your groups and everything through DSpace, you'll want to create other sort of groups that make more sense based on your institution. So we could add a new group that refers to, say, again, the Department of Physics. So we can have a group that's the Department of Physics. You can start to add either ePeople or other groups into this group. So if I wanted to add myself, I could go in and select my user into the Department of Physics, and you'll see it says pending here right now, so I have to actually save because you could add multiple at once if I wanted to. So now I've created that group, and now we've got a Department of Physics group down here, and it's got 1 member within it. And you could go back at any time and edit the name if you wanted to. You can remove the people, add a subgroup to it if you wanted to. So if you wanted to give another department full access to this particular group, you could actually have a different departmental group or a sub-department group that also gets access to the Department of Physics, or however you want to do it. So those groups then allow you can then start to reutilize those groups within other sort of permission areas. So if we went back to our Department of Physics, I could either go back to the community page, or I could just go right into this community admin group. Right now we have this empty group that has no members. So it got created because I clicked on the Create Admin Group button, but I never added anybody to it. But now I could go back here and I could say, okay, I want to add the Department of Physics group, or say I just know it's named Physics. as admins. So say everybody gets admin or everybody gets submission or whatever. Then I can say everybody in this group gets to be added as an admin or as a submitter or whatever you want to do. And I can save that. So now our community admin group has one member. And if we go back there, we can see that that member is the group Department of Physics. And so every person within that group now also has admin permissions within that particular community. You can do the same thing with any other sort of group, of course. One side note to mention, again, if you're using an external authentication system like LDAP or Shibboleth or something, you can actually sort of auto-sync groups within LDAP or Shibboleth into DSpace as well. So if you already have a group that represents Department of Physics within LDAP or Shibboleth, we can configure behind the scenes a way to actually kind of have it auto-sync up with a group within DSpace that is also called Department of Physics or whatever you want to call it within DSpace. So that's another way to manage groups in a little bit more of an automated fashion. But that's kind of how you give people access into DSpace. I recommend as much as possible trying to use groups to provide people access, just because it sometimes makes a little bit more sense than trying to manage individual users one by one. And it also makes it easier if, like you say, okay, everybody in a certain, in the library needs to be able to submit to this collection. Then you just make sure everybody's added to the proper library group or proper Department of Physics group, and you don't have to worry about adding them to every single individual collection that they may need access to. So groups are a powerful way of kind of doing that. The last few things to mention very briefly here, that's basically most of the administrative stuff that you're going to do in DSpace. But I do want to just have a couple other very small side notes of just other features DSpace does provide to you. There are the ability, well, you saw some of these things here, the ability to add withdrawn or jump into withdrawn items or private items, things that you marked in that way. There's the control panel is stuff that is more things that DSpaceDirect administrators will be utilizing at some points in time, and you may see things like a system-wide alert that may come across your DSpaceDirect instance, where myself or someone else may post an alert message that the system will be going down briefly for maintenance. And this would just happen during maintenance periods where if I enabled this particular alert, I can actually enable a countdown period if I wanted to and activate it or deactivate it. And then every page in the DSpace system, in your DSpaceDirect system, will have that little note so that you and your users know that to expect that things are going to come down in the next 5 minutes or the next 10 minutes or whatever, and to try and save things and go ahead and log out so that we can do the necessary maintenance. And then everything else here is more high-level administrative, sysadministrative stuff that DSpaceDirect will more manage for you. But you can peek in things if you wanted to and see like who's logged into the system right now, who's accessing the system. All that sort of stuff is sort of temporarily tracked within these within the current activity stuff. So just worth being aware of. We also have, let's see here. There's the ability here to do things like actually, going back to the home page, like actually see usage statistics within your DSpace instance. So there's a statistics box here. By default, the statistics information is only available to your administrative users. If you wanted to, we can also make it publicly available. Those are the two options within DSpace. Some people actually want their statistics to be totally available to the public so that individual departments and professors can actually go in and look at download stats and stuff like that. But others really like to keep that information private, so it's only admin users. By default, it's admin users. But this box actually changes based on where you are within the system. Like I'd mentioned, it knows what page you're on and provides different levels of statistics based on that. So at the site-wide level, it gives some very basic overview stuff. And we're not going to see a whole lot from the demo site because not many people are accessing it. But it'll change as you all play around with it as a sandbox. So you can kind of see at the site-wide level what's our most viewed item within the system. and how many views has it gotten. You can also see search statistics, so what have people searched on within the system, and what sort of page views resulted in that search. Did they click on a page and actually view the page and all that sort of stuff? How many searches have been run? Even over the previous month or last year, you can get basic information like that. We got the basic workflow statistics, which have to do with that approval process. You can see how many approvals have actually been performed within your system based on the various steps. And again, you can go back up to a year to get some basic statistics. And these statistics views are being enhanced constantly within DSpace, so they'll get even prettier as things go along. It's actually a relatively new feature within the DSpace software. But as I mentioned, these links sort of change, and what you see changes when you browse around. So if we go into our sample community, we can look at the usage statistics within that community, which actually gives us the total views of this community page, and you can see the trend over the last few months. You can also see what countries have most viewed this particular community, and even what cities within the U.S. or in the world have most viewed this particular community. You get very similar information at the collection level, the same sort of stats like the community. At the item level, you get even more information as well. So if we go to, let's go to one that has probably had a couple hits. At this particular item level, I can now see how many people have viewed the item page without even downloading files. And when did those views come, and what's the trend over time. This particular didn't have any downloads. If there was a download of the files, you'd actually get the same sort of information as to how many downloads of the files have occurred. And you get to see where they came from again in the world, what country, what city they came from. So you get sort of basic statistical information that's automatically captured by DSpace. And again, you can decide whether these are for admin only, or if you want to have them made publicly available to all of your users. And the final thing to note here is that there is the capability within a particular community or collection for, say you've got a ton of work into your system over time or over the last year, and you want to go through and actually clean up metadata or something like that. You can actually go into a particular community or a collection, and either a full admin or a collection or community admin can go in and actually export all of the metadata. This actually provides an ability to do sort of batch metadata editing. So you want to do like some sort of massive cleanup that you know that things have been messy over time or whatever. You can do some massive cleanup across an entire community, across an entire collection within DSpace. We don't necessarily recommend it across an entire site, because that can be a little bit overwhelming, especially if you have a lot of content. But it allows you the ability to actually export this metadata and work with it and massage it in a bulk fashion. And how this actually works, and I'm not going to go into it in too much detail here, other than to say we have some very good tutorials, including videos in the knowledge base, is that clicking on this button actually will export it all into a CSV file, which is essentially sort of an Excel spreadsheet. And you can go into Microsoft Excel and look at all the metadata there and actually clean up the metadata within Excel using a lot of the tools within Excel to do things in a much more bulk fashion. And then all you have to do is, once you're done with that editing, then you can go in and do the import of the metadata, where you can go and just upload that same CSV file. And DSpace will then show you a nice visual representation of all of the metadata changes it sees within that CSV file. And then you can choose to apply them, or if you notice something is wrong, you can tweak it a little bit more in Excel and then re-upload it. But once you do that re-upload, DSpace will basically apply all of the changes that you did to that Excel spreadsheet into the metadata within your DSpace instance. So it's a really powerful tool. There's a lot more you can even do with it. You can even import a ton of content, just metadata fields, with using it if you wanted to. It's a relatively powerful thing that I really can't go into now, but we have some good tutorials on that already available, and we plan on putting up even more around that. And so that's really it. That's everything I wanted to go over with DSpace. That gives you a good overview of getting stuff in the system, getting rights to people, giving people appropriate rights, setting up your community collection hierarchy, and starting to submit content into the system as items. And then a little bit about some of the administrative stuff around viewing statistics and doing some metadata massaging if you ever wanted to go and tweak that metadata. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop here and open it up for questions. I see we're basically 2 hours on the dot. So, are there any questions anybody has or anything that I failed to cover well enough?
I'm thinking we might have questions that occur to us later.
Yep, obviously.
What is the best way to address it? Like, is that through you, Carissa, or?
Yep. So after today's session, I'll be sending out an email with all of the things that Tim had referenced, as well as the email address. It's support@DSpaceDirect.org, and that's where any questions or support issues can be emailed to going forward. And I'll be sure to put that in the email address as well. It's also listed on the DSpaceDirect knowledge base, which will continue to flesh out with copies of the videos of these training sessions, as well as new documentation as you folks suggested or as we come up with it. So that will be your home for all DSpaceDirect documentation going forward. And then the support@DSpaceDirect.org email address for any other additional questions or support-related feedback.
Terrific. Thank you.
And I think Robbie just asked a question. After uploading, how long before we should notice that content is available on the web, i.e. by searching Google, Bing, or whatever search engine you prefer?
That actually kind of depends on when Google next indexes your site. DSpace, I didn't really fully get into this too much, but DSpace software actually tries to be very, very friendly to the Google indexing process and the Google search engine, Google Scholar, Yahoo, Bing, all of those sort of things. So within each page within DSpace, a lot of metadata is sort of embedded within the HTML to try and get Google and get Yahoo and get Bing to come and realize that there's updates. So as much as possible, we try and enhance that as best as we can. And a general way, shape, or form, I know a lot of DSpace sites that get a lot of activity within them will often get indexed by Google, Yahoo, and Bing on an almost nightly basis. But it sometimes does depend on the amount of activity in your site because Google and Yahoo and Bing and all of them can actually tell whether or not your site has changed. And so they start to kind of bump sites up that change frequently versus ones that don't change as frequently. So I don't know that I can exactly answer that because I think it actually may be different for different DSpaceDirect customers based on the amount of activity. But I would expect it, at the very least, you're probably going to see it start to pop up there within probably less than a week. But as your site gets more and more active, it may start to become more like a day or 2 days time period where it will start popping up on those search engines. And some may be quicker than others. So you may see it on Google before Bing or Bing before Google based on their schedules.
Any other questions for folks before we let you go for the day? If there are no questions, I want to first thank Tim for a very thorough inaugural training session. Thank you very much. And thanks to everybody who has signed on to be a beta participant of DSpaceDirect and for all of your time and great questions today. It certainly is appreciated. If you have any suggestions or recommendations for format, content, style of the training session, or once you link to the knowledge base, have any other suggestions for content that we can start to add in the documentation area, please feel free to send me that feedback. We're certainly, as part of the beta, relying on you folks for input as we continue to evolve this service. So again, thanks to everyone on the call today, and thank you very much to Tim for leading a fantastically thorough training session.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Take care, everyone, and we will all be in touch, I'm sure. Thank you all again.